The story of. By the time the 6th century arrived, Mecca had become something its early founders might not have recognized. It was no longer a quiet valley, defined by a spring and a modest house of worship. It had become a hub of commerce, a crossing point for caravans moving goods across Arabia, and its merchants had grown rich off the constant flow of travelers passing through. At the center of it all still stood the ancient house Abraham had rebuilt, but its meaning had been buried beneath centuries of accumulated superstition. Hundreds of idols now crowded its walls and courtyard, each representing a different tribal deity, each attracting its own circle of worshippers who came not to remember the one God, but to appease dozens of imagined ones. The structure itself remained sacred in the eyes of the Arabs. Its prestige, if anything, had grown, but its original purpose had been buried under layers of tradition that had drifted far from where it began. Mecca, in other words, was thriving and lost at the same time. The year the elephants turned back, far south of Mecca, in the fertile lands of Yemen, a powerful governor named Abraha ruled on behalf of the Aksumite Empire. Abraha had built an extravagant cathedral intended to rival and eventually replace the ancient house in Mecca as the region's primary destination for pilgrims. He wanted the flow of travelers, and with it, the prestige and wealth that came from their visits, redirected toward his own creation. It did not work. No matter how magnificent his cathedral was, the hearts of the Arabian tribes remained tied to the valley their ancestors had walked for generations. Humiliated by his failure to draw people away, Abraha's ambition curdled into rage. If he could not outshine Mecca's sanctuary, the edge of a boundary they were not permitted to cross was regarded as the purest and most eloquent form of Arabic a child could learn. Families who could afford it, and even those who could barely afford it, often sought out wet nurses willing to take in a Meccan infant for a period of years. Among the women who traveled to Mecca that season searching for a child to nurse was a woman named Halima from a modest desert tribe. Her circumstances were far from comfortable. Her livestock were weak, her own milk had run dry from hardship, and her family was struggling. By the time she arrived, every infant from a family of means had already been claimed by other nurses. The only child left unclaimed was an orphan, a boy whose father had died before his birth, and who therefore came with no promise of payment or reward. Halima hesitated. Taking on a child without financial benefit seemed, from a practical standpoint, an unwise decision for a family already struggling to survive. But something in her could not bring herself to leave empty-handed. She turned to her husband and suggested that perhaps, even without payment, some blessing might come from caring for this particular child. What followed, according to the accounts of her family, defied every expectation. The moment she took the boy into her care, her body, which had produced no milk for her own child, suddenly provided more than enough for both children. Her weakened animals regained their strength. A donkey that had struggled to keep pace on the journey into Mecca now outran the rest of the caravan on the way home. Her husband, astonished by the sudden reversal of their fortune, remarked that this child had brought blessing into their household unlike anything they had experienced before. Years of unexplainable fortune. The years that followed only deepened the family's sense that they were caring for no ordinary child. Pastures that had once struggled through drought turned green and fertile. Their livestock thrived, while neighboring herds continued to suffer. Other families in the region reportedly began directing their own flocks toward the same land. Halima's family grazed, believing that wherever she went, prosperity seemed to follow close behind. For 4 years, the boy remained under her care, treated with the same affection she gave her own children. When the time eventually came for him to return to his mother in Mecca, the bond between them did not fade. Halima remembered him for the rest of her life as the child who had transformed her family's fortune, and she suspected, long before the rest of the world would come to know it, that he was destined for something far greater than an ordinary life. A monk recognizes what others could not. As the boy grew older, he came under the guardianship of his uncle, Abu Talib, who took him along on trading expeditions across the Arabian trade routes. On one such journey towards Syria, when the boy was roughly 12 years old, the caravan stopped to rest near a Christian monastery. Inside that monastery lived a monk named Bahira, a man who had devoted much of his life to studying religious scripture, texts that, according to tradition, contained descriptions of a prophet who was still to come, one who would arrive after Jesus and would be recognized as the final messenger in a long line of prophets. As the caravan approached, Bahira noticed something unusual. A small patch of cloud seemed to trail above the group, offering shade regardless of where they moved. Curious, he invited the travelers to share a meal with him, quietly studying each face for any resemblance to the descriptions he had spent years memorizing. None of the men gathered around his table matched what he was looking for. He asked whether anyone had remained behind. Abu Talib mentioned that only a young nephew had stayed with the caravan, that he ordered the killing of Israelite infant boys, fearing a prophecy that one of them would eventually rise against him. Moses survived only through a series of remarkable events. Placed in a basket and set adrift on the Nile, he was found and raised, ironically, within the very palace of the ruler who sought to eliminate children like him. Grown into adulthood, but never forgetting the suffering of his own people, Moses eventually received a divine calling to confront the very ruler who had unknowingly raised him, demanding freedom for the enslaved Israelites. That confrontation, and the eventual exodus that followed, is one of history's most retold stories of liberation. But embedded within the commandments given to Moses was something easily overlooked by those who only remember the Exodus itself. A promise that another prophet would eventually rise, not from among the Israelites themselves, but from among their brothers. To those familiar with the ancestral split between Isaac and Ishmael, the implication was clear. The promised figure would emerge from the Arab descendants of Ishmael, not the Israelite descendants of Isaac. Centuries later, Jesus himself is described in Islamic tradition as speaking of a coming guide, one who would arrive after him, who would not speak from personal desire, but only convey what he was given, and who would reveal truths still to come. Two prophets, separated by centuries and speaking to entirely different audiences, had each pointed toward the same eventual figure. When Bahira looked into the eyes of a 12-year-old boy resting near his monastery, he understood, with total conviction, that the promises made across generations were finally converging into a single life. The trustworthy one. As the boy grew into a young man, his reputation began to precede him throughout Mecca. He became known simply as the Trustworthy, a title earned not through wealth or family status, since he possessed neither in abundance, but through an unshakable reputation for honesty in every dealing, kindness toward those less fortunate, and fairness in resolving disputes that others could not settle. It was this reputation that eventually caught the attention of a woman named Khadija, one of the wealthiest and most respected figures in Mecca, known not only for her business success, but for a personal integrity so notable that even the proudest men of the city referred to her with a title meaning the Pure One. Khadija had turned away numerous suitors from among Mecca's wealthiest and most powerful families. But when she heard of this young man's reputation, she entrusted him to lead one of her trading caravans. The results exceeded anything she had experienced with previous traders. But it was not merely his success in business that impressed her. It was the character behind it. Through an intermediary, she proposed marriage. Though he possessed comparatively little wealth of his own, she recognized in him something no amount of money could replicate. Their marriage would last 25 years, ending only with her death, and by every account, it was built on a foundation of genuine partnership, respect, and unwavering loyalty. Khadija would go on to become far more than a spouse. She would be his first supporter in the most difficult chapter of his life, standing beside him moment